Rush Limbaugh died yesterday at age 70 after a long battle with cancer. Rush wasn't just a giant. There's nobody like him in the field. There's never been anybody like him, and there never will be anybody like him. But he wasn't just a giant. He was our giant. Of all the people I ever saw out there on either side of the political spectrum, I never saw anybody who could so clearly crystallize an idea, explain an idea, and much more importantly than all of that, endlessly, effortlessly provide the moral foundation for why he believed what he believed in. He was our giant, and we're going to miss him. A lot of people who are talking about Rush today, various commentators and so on, all of them have pretty much two things in common. The first one that virtually all of us in this business say is that, number one, we just simply wouldn't be here without him. Rush Limbaugh invented talk radio as it exists, really invented it. In the age before the internet, his voice going out often on AM stations around the country was a way for Americans who had watched their country being taken away from them by coastal elites. It was a voice that reminded them of who we are and what we should be. And that voice never faltered from the first moment he got on the air. He became a tremendously wealthy man, and that is another example that Rush Limbaugh gave all of us, because he basically started from nothing, and he became fabulously wealthy because he provided a valuable service that people were willing to pay for in terms of commercials. And if you've ever listened to AM talk radio, and I'm sure every single one of you have, there's no shortage of commercials. But people would stay through those commercials because of what Rush had to say, and fairly soon became apparent that if Rush endorsed something or backed something, that product was going to sell. That's what he did with Snapple and so on. But the point of all this is just simply to say that among the many other beacons of freedom that his life represented, the ability to turn your ability, your natural talent, your willingness, all of it, into a really magnificent lifestyle was perhaps the best example that he gave us during the whole time. Which reminds me of my favorite Rush Limbaugh story. I've told it a couple times, but it's to me, it's the epitome of what the man is and was and always will be. The story goes that on the air, Rush said he was flying in his private jet to a golf tournament. That alone, given the time, just not too long ago, was a taunt. It was a basic blow back to the face, counterpunch to all of these celebrities who are using their own private jets to lecture people on how the little people should cut their carbon emissions, but they had to fly to global warming conventions and so on in order to save the planet. Rush saying he used his jet to go golfing was just a direct slap in the face of those people and basically pointed out how hypocritical they were. The second thing I like about that initial setup for the story, which gets even better, was that he had none of the shame that he was supposed to feel about being wealthy. He earned every single penny he ever made. That golden microphone and that excellence in broadcasting motto and logo and company, he had no apologies to make to anybody. But anyway, the story gets better. So according to the story, when he's talking about it on the air, he says, yes, I was on EIB 1 on my way to a golf tournament. And as I was halfway across the country, I realized that I'd left my favorite driver back in my house. So I made a phone call from the plane, and I had them take my driver from the house, take it down to the airport, and had them deliver it to me on EIB 2, my other private jet. And when he said that, I honestly gasped. I was just gobsmacked. And that's the thing about Rush Limbaugh that is most outstanding about him. The thing I remember most is his absolute moral certainty in the face of so much social peer pressure to simply come out and say the things that we all believed. And in an era where what we believe has been so heavily influenced by the media stream that we swim up against every single day, time and time and time again, as the left continued their chokehold on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, Rush Limbaugh would not only come out and say something that was provocative in its in its non-politically correct fashion. He wouldn't just say something provocative. He would say it in such a provocative way that it made its own point. And in this particular case that I just love so much, when he said I sent my second private jet to carry my golf club, one golf club, to me because I wanted it, I just plain gasped. And I realized I gasped because I had been so conditioned to believe that there's something just really, really wrong about this, and money is evil, and jets are evil, and owning things are evil, luxury is evil, the ability to do what you want with your own money, that's the main thing that was absolutely evil, couldn't be tolerated. But here was this man with this fundamental, it's not even moral courage in the case of Rush Limbaugh. It's not. Courage is doing things in the face of fear. If I or any of the other people that stand in his mighty shadow, and will always stand in his shadow, ever do anything that is bold or provocative, that's a courageous act on our part because we're afraid of it. Because every single person in this business on some level or another knows what's coming for them. They know what kind of blowback they're going to get. They know the kind of names they're going to be called and all of it. I don't know if that happened to Rush, but from the outside, to me, he looked like a man who was fearless because he simply wasn't afraid of them. Rush Limbaugh became a giant because of talk radio, which meant people, generally speaking, driving to or from work. He was the voice for the people that had no voice. He was the voice of the working man. He believed absolutely in the common man, and that was who he was the champion of. And he has the same principles as I do on this. Well, I suppose I should say I have the same principles as he does. That'd be more appropriate. A fundamental belief in the goodness and wisdom of the American people. He never lost that. And that came from speaking to people who were on the road, truck drivers or people who were working. That's who listened to Rush Limbaugh. So none of us would be here without him. And the second thing I've noticed from everybody out there in the wake of his passing is a manifestation of the same thing that I felt as soon as I got over the immediate, I can't call it shock. Everybody knew that he was dying, and he himself had the courage to address that issue many times. But when I heard that he'd actually died, I remember the first thought I had, and that was, I have to find the picture I have of me standing next to Rush in an event, because I want everybody to know that I got close enough to talk to him. That, I know, sounds like it's verging on worship, but that's pretty much what it is. And I'm not the only person alone in this. I saw an article this morning from Tammy Bruce, who at the time, when Rush in the mid-90s, was Mr. Arch Conservative, and she was a radical left-wing lesbian. She said she invited him on his show and expected him to be the monster that everybody has portrayed him to be on the left. And she was astonished at how kind he was, how generous he was, genuinely interested in them and her and so on. Seth MacFarlane, who's one of the most anti-American influencers out there, and he's a very influential person, had originally contacted Rush to be on Family Guy as a means of skewering him. And he ended up liking him so much that the two actually became quite good friends. And that's the story you hear about him all the time. It's his ability to be not only just not the boogeyman they make him out to be, but to be, in fact, one of the best people they ever met. And so when I heard the news, I wanted to get that picture up there. And Tammy wanted to tell her story about meeting Rush. And immediately upon the news breaking, I got a text from Scott Ott. And it was a picture that he had just taken. And it was a picture of his book that he wrote when he was doing Scrapple Face on the web. And right on the front cover is a block quote from Rush Limbaugh talking about how hilarious he is and how he listens to him all the time, reads him all the time, and constantly makes him laugh. I only had one chance to meet Rush. By the way, one of the reasons that Rush didn't meet an awful lot of people, didn't do an awful lot of out-on-the-road meet and greets, is, some of you know this probably, certainly his fans know this, but he was nearly completely 100% deaf. He couldn't hear a thing. And while he was very comfortable on the radio, if you put him out in a live event, he became extremely self-conscious only because he didn't want to give people the impression that he wasn't listening to them. It wasn't that he wasn't listening, it was that he couldn't listen. He was pretty nearly completely deaf. And that limited his social activities and his public speaking. But I was at an event he was public speaking on. And when I finally got a chance to meet him afterwards, I simply walked up to him and just said, Rush, like everybody else in this room, I'm just an enormous fan, and I'm just really honored to be here. And he turned to me and he said, Bill, I've just been loving the work you're doing, and what you're doing out there is so important, and it's so well thought out, and a bunch of other compliments that elude me now because I was so, it's if you want to know how I felt, you just go look at when the Beatles came to America and look at those teenage girls like reaching up for the stage, and when Paul McCartney, smiles at you, you just want to just squee out and stuff. It's not very manly, but it's true. And we all felt that way. I think the most moving thing I saw from Rush Limbaugh was his thank you note to President Donald Trump, which came out just a few days before he died, in which he acknowledged he didn't have much time left. And it was thanking him for all the things he did for the little people, for the regular people, for Rush's audience and our audience and all of us who are not on the glamorous side of this divide. It was just magnificent. He did live long enough to receive the Medal of Freedom, and not only receive it, but receive it in the House of Representatives in front of the eyes of the entire country. And of all the things that Donald Trump accomplished in his term in office, his first term anyway, that was certainly one of the highlights. That was a grand and graceful gesture for a man who deserves a lot more credit than he got from the other side of the aisle. That's, I think, the thing that's most ironic about his life, is how many people benefited from the arguments he was making while they called him a Nazi and a racist and all the rest of it. He was fighting for their freedom too. I don't feel sad about Rush's passing. I know maybe that sounds harsh, but I don't. I certainly feel the loss. If we ever needed the man, God knows it's now. But I don't feel sad about him dying. And the reason I don't is because I cannot imagine, really, honestly cannot imagine, a better led life than that. I've known people who've, through hard work, become fantastically wealthy. I've known people who started with nothing and through hard work became quite famous. And Rush not only became famous and wealthy, he became the voice of a nation. He spoke for 100 million people or more. Every day. Every day. He was out there doing it again and again and again. I've never heard him wrong. And for Rush Limbaugh to say, I know who you are, would have been the greatest honor of my life, certainly professionally. But for him to say that he was a fan, which is a term he actually used, and he admired the work I was doing and really enjoyed it, was, to me, obviously an ego boost, but it was more than that. What it was for me, really, was the satisfaction of knowing that on some microscopic level, I had done a little bit for Rush Limbaugh what Rush Limbaugh had done for me every day. Just to know that there was something I could give back to the guy was very, very important to me. And even though I said so, I don't know if you heard me, but it was because of him that I'm here, and Ben is here, and Crowder's here, and all the rest of us are here. I'd like to just close the way I opened. He wasn't just a giant. He was our giant. He was our giant. Finally, for once, the regular people of America, the patriots who go to work every day in the morning, the people without any glamour or tremendous wealth or houses overlooking the ocean, he was a voice for all of us, and he was so damn good at what he did that I wouldn't have traded him for anybody, not for a living soul. He was our giant, and the best way we can honor his memory is do everything that we can within our power to return America to the kind of country he would be proud of, and most of all, to realize that of all the arguments he ever made, The one that we should remember forever is that the enemies of freedom are constantly, perpetually trying to demoralize us, to get us to give up, to get us to despair, and to get us out of the fight. I never once heard him feel sorry for himself or for us or for anything else. And that's what I'm going to take with me from Mr. Limbaugh. Next time I feel like I'm filled with despair and I don't know any way out of this situation and watching things just slide away, I'm just going to remember what our giant was and what he stood for, and how the idea of being sad and filled with despair is okay, so long as you get up the next day. And that's what he did, day after day after day. He got up, drove to work, sat behind that golden microphone, and saved the country.